This is the
BrighterSpectrum podcast,
where we illuminate the world of parenting children with autism. I'm CJ, a proud dad to a wonderful 6-year-old with autism. Through my journey, I've discovered the challenges, triumphs, and unique experiences that come with raising a child on the spectrum. Inspired by those experiences, I created this space where parents like you can find understanding, share stories, and learn from each other. Join me as we explore insights, strategies, and support, all while celebrating the brighter spectrum of our children's lives. Now, let's dive in and cast light on this path together. Is a parent life coach who's neuroaffirming and specializes in neurodiversity. Being autistic herself and having an autistic child, we have like a really interesting and very personal look at parenting kids on the spectrum and involving spirituality in that as well. Welcome to the show, Celestyna Wild. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today.
Yay, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to talk with you.
Yeah, I'm excited for this too. I didn't really intend when I started the show to involve like religious and spiritual views. I did have previously John Fella on, who does a lot of very strong work that is really Christian in depth. And he didn't really dive super deep into the religious aspect of being a neurodivergent parent. But like if people like went further beyond the episode and explored his websites and stuff, you see it's a very like it's foundation in the work that he does, which is fantastic. It's great that somebody out here is involving, what they think to be like the higher truth, and trying to work with that and helping people. So it's going to be really interesting to kind of get the more, I guess we could say, like paganistic or spiritual medium side from you today. And before we really get into that, though, can we get a little background from you about like you and your own child and sort of your experiences with that?
Yeah, totally. I do just want, if it's okay, to speak to what you just said about like the spirituality and the religion, and then I can share a little bit about me and my kid, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
So, it's really interesting. I don't actually consider myself religious. Like, I have a very strong independent streak. And I think what works for me, the type of person I am, is something that's like very individualized and personalized. I actually, I tend to come at it from like a pragmatism first view. Like, you do what you have to do to like help yourself and help your family. And so like, for example, and we can get into this later, like one of the things that I have found really helpful, and I think that I want to say particularly mothers and particularly stay-at-home mothers, but this can apply to like any stay-at-home parent or any family that just feels like really isolated in domesticity, which I feel like we all experienced to a degree during COVID, is that like house life can begin to feel just really banal and boring and overwhelming. Like you're just like cleaning, doing the dishes, tending to your kids, like over and over and over again.
Yep.
So, one of the things that I have incorporated into my own practice, and I do call it a spiritual practice. I honestly only recently started using that word. But I think of it, or if people are uncomfortable, or if they already are solidly in a religion and like don't want to mess with that, it can be, it can be helpful to think about it as just being like an energetic dimension that you're introducing versus like necessarily a spiritual dimension. But one of the things that I did that I found really helpful is to begin to like incorporate ritual and intention into my daily activities. So for example, because I am a coach and because at the time I was building my business, I would do things like unloading the dishwasher, and I would just kind of set an intention for like every dish that I put back in its place, that it would help magnetize a best fit client to me. And just giving it that like additional layer made it less obligatory and banal and more fun. So that is kind of the work that I do with my clients, and
Mm-hmm.
it's very personalized. So if someone comes to me and they say that they're a Christian and they don't want anything that would conflict with that, we find ways to create this dimension of their parenting, but in a way that feels like safe for them, but also practical. Because the goal is, like we were talking about before we started recording, to support parents in supporting themselves, not just supporting their kids.
Right, right.
So
Yeah, you're kind of talking that division between religion and spirituality, where there's that very hard devotion that comes with religion, where energetic spirituality is more just like practice mindfulness and energy transfer and just being aware of like what you're
yeah,
doing and stuff. So 100% understand that. I kind of phrase it the way I did because like I said, previously I had a Christian person on whose parenting and organization is very strongly founded in Christianity, and later on down the line, I actually have another person who's going to be representing Christianity coming onto the show. And like when you speak to a person who's like of the Abrahamic faith, they a lot of times don't have that division um, when they think about it. Like religion and spirituality is one and the same, and it all conflicts, and it gets very like muddy when you talk to people inside of those faiths. So it's hard to really represent those divisions with them, if that makes sense.
yeah. Yeah, so I mean, I'm happy to share like about my own practice as well, and I think about it as not purely spiritual. There's well, yeah, I think more and more I'm thinking about it is just like on an energetic level. Like there's a lot
Mm-hmm.
of indigeneity that I incorporate into my world view,
Right.
but it is this sense of there's more aliveness around us than just like sentient beings or things that we would visually or like with our senses categorize as like being obviously alive. So but we can get into that, and I'm happy to introduce myself and talk a little bit about my personal um experience with neurodiversity and with parenting, because I don't
Yeah.
want to over that.
Yeah,
Okay.
let's get
Like,
into that. Because I'll tell you what, I can talk about spirituality and religion all day long. So before we
yeah.
get stuck in that trap, let's go ahead and let's hear about you, your personal story, and your kid.
So, I have two children. One child is more spicy than the other child. But I'm also trying to, it can, I think a lot of people have this experience as parents, especially if they have two kids with very different personalities. It can get very easy to just be like, this is the kid that does this, and this is the kid that does that. This is the kid that is this, and this is the kid that is that. And so I actually noticed myself just being like, okay, like this is my neurotypical kid, this is my neurodivergent kid, and just being like, you know what? I I think I need to hold off because it's my neurotypical, the one that I'd been coding as neurotypical, is also a girl. And there's all sorts of issues with diagnosis and with masking where girls are just, tend to be a little bit more socially and relationally intelligent. And so
Hmm.
they can mask and integrate a little bit better. So I'm actually wanting to kind of hold that loosely because, for all I know, my daughter could be neurodivergent and for sure does deserve not just being like discarded as like, oh, this is my easy kid, like she's just going to fit into the mold, no problem. So, but I was late identified autistic and ADHD. It was actually after I had my kid that
Mm.
I, I think one of the gifts of becoming a parent is that it really can invite you into a self exploration that the depths have not been accessible to you until you've had kids. And that happened to me both with my own neurodivergence, but also with like parenting lineage, I think is the way I want to say it, with like the cycles that do get passed down. Prior to having kids, I was just like, yeah, my life was normal, my parents were chill, they were good
Hmm.
parents, like end of story. And it was only after I had my kids that I really started to kind of question that assumption. And it's not that my parents were bad parents. And I think, one of the things that parents also get invited into after becoming parents, and we talked about this a little bit before we started recording, is like there's so much paradox in parenting. Like on the one hand, you love your kid, but on the other hand, like you can't stand them right now and you need a break. Or and so with assessing my own parents, it was very similar. It was like, on the one hand, they were like super loving parents who really martyred themselves and sacrificed so much. And on the other hand, there are ways in which I wasn't supported and, kind of negative patterns that I did inherit. And so it's really important to be able to hold all of that instead of feeling like you have to kind of identify with one polarity or the other. So, for me, I can say my parents were amazing parents, and they also gave me a lot of developmental trauma. And
Right,
I
right.
think that's the case for everyone.
It's there's a lot of value in stuff you just said. I just kind of want to touch on a couple things. Like you said, there, you don't want to like make that division between this is my neurotypical, this is my neurodivergent, which I totally understand. I only have one kid myself, but for the last year or so, my brother moved in with me, and he has his son who is neurotypical. And I'll tell you what, neurodivergent or neurotypical, both of them make me take medicine out of the same Advil bottle. Um, and then yeah, like when it comes to parents, it kind of reminds me, and I can't remember for the life of me the comedian's name, but he did this bit where he talks about being a parent, and he's like, none of us know what we're doing. We're just out here trying our best, and like your kid will yell at you and be like, "That's not fair," and you're like, "Probably, I don't know." Like you're just trying to do everything that you can, and a lot of times results in some good, and then it results in mistakes. And whether it's neurotypical or neurodivergent, that's just kind of what being a parent is, right? And just trying to like blaze your trail and figure out what you got to do.
Yeah, that reminds me. We've been watching the show Acapulco, and I'm sorry for anyone. I'm not about to like explain this show to you, but there's a mom, and there's this one line where she's like, that's one of the beauties of being a parent, is that you get basically like endless chances to repair, because it's a lifelong relationship, and it's such a complex relationship. And, I think that's one of the things that I think about too, as far as the paradox of parenting. And something that we don't talk about culturally at all is this kind of understanding that you are going to need to integrate the part of you that does harm better, because it's going to like you're gonna hurt your kid, you're gonna screw up, you are in a position of power and authority. And there's going to be times where you're tired and stressed and you snap and
Mm-hmm.
you scare your kid, or and so this is part of the work that I do and that I really love, is to unshame parents in those darker dimensions of parenting, where you really like come face to face with your raw humanity and your raw primality.
Right.
And not getting so stuck there, like not getting stuck in this like shame and guilt spiral of like I'm a horrible parent, but just really just being like, yeah, that happens, humans are human. No
Real
human
quick,
goes through. Oh yeah.
before you get too deep into that, you said something really, really interesting, and I don't want to forget about it and let it escape. You said, they're going to have those moments where you have that very human moment, and you snap, and you do something that scares your kid, and you like feeling guilty and whatnot. What is your view on apologizing to a child once you've done something like that? And I ask that because say like my parents and my mom has said this to me on occasions, like never ever apologize, and I actually don't agree with that. There's been several times where I've apologized to my son because I felt like I reacted poorly to something he's done. I've sat there and told him, buddy, daddy's really sorry. I didn't mean to treat you that way. You kind of caught me at a bad moment, and I'm trying not to do that. Obviously, like, I've never like struck him out of anger or anything like that, but like there's been times where like I've snapped at him, like, because I've been like really overwhelmed myself with something. And like I sat down and I apologized to him. And I know that the previous generation was like, you're the authority figure. You're supposed to know better. You don't apologize to kids. And that was sort of like the parenting generational thought at the time. And I feel like it's kind of evolving. And I'm curious to see like how you sort of feel about that.
Oh, that is a great question. And to throw myself under the bus and also to kind of get back to telling my personal story. When I first became a parent, I had not done the work that I now teach. And so my nervous system was really unhealthy and like overly activated. And so I think it's, again, important. A lot of the work that I do is in shaming, just to publicly say, like, I never hit my kid, but for sure there was times when I grabbed him roughly, or like did
Yes.
something physically that was incredibly regrettable. There was times where I screamed at the top of my lungs, and there was like a particularly regrettable moment where my kid actually got into my medicine, and I was so dysregulated by it that I called him a dumbass, and I could tell that like that really hurt him because he repeated it for several days afterwards, and like hopefully we have like gotten past that. But this is to say, like, even someone who's a professional parent coach, and I think there can be a lot of shame around this, and we don't share this publicly. We don't even share this with our friends because we
Mm-hmm.
feel so much shame around it. So I think with my parents and even with myself, there is a certain healing that happens where we can share it publicly and also just know like it's not the end of the world. Like I have infinite chances to try again. There are skills and techniques and support available to me so that I don't have to white knuckle my way into calm. And it's also really, especially in this culture, I feel like this culture is very much a zero tolerance, like punitive culture. So it can feel really scary to admit when we've done something wrong, because in
Yes.
media we see models of people just like getting incarcerated or like getting exiled or like getting gossiped about or canceled. And so I think that's one of the reasons why I really love incorporating indigeneity into my worldview and into my practices, because it's a culture that is very much about calling in and understanding that we're human and offering support and offering like second chances and
Mm-hmm.
third chances. And with all that being said, I mean, I think you know what I'm going to say. I think the people that I apologize the most to are my children, because the other thing that we don't talk about is maybe outside of our partners, but I think even more so than our partners, our children are the relationship that's going to be the most triggering for us. And when we're triggered, there really is a compulsive reaction where we are in our amygdala, we are in our defense mechanisms. We are acting as though we were the age of 5 or the age of 8. There's all this like neural hardwiring where we are not our conscious best adult self. And so that in itself is a spiritual assignment, is realizing that your kid is who you're both going to take your trauma out on, but who is going to hopefully inspire you to begin to heal that trauma.
Yeah, yeah.
No,
Self accountability is definitely a
yeah.
major part of shadow work, and you really can't hold your kid to any level of self accountability if you're not going to have any of your own, right?
Yeah. And again, I think the self accountability piece becomes so much easier when it is scaffolded and built on a foundation of self compassion, grace, forgiveness. Because if you think that the minute you take accountability, you're going to get punished, you're going to get judged, it's very hard to do. If
Hmm.
you know that when you take accountability, you will be met with forgiveness, with understanding, with humor, with just like, yeah, I get it, that happens to me too. We'll figure this out together. It's so much easier to take accountability.
Right, right. And I'm so sorry. I'm so scatterbrained because you and I have like some really strong synchronicities with like the way we look at stuff. I'm really excited to talk about all of it. So I'd really like to get back to your story now. I'm sorry.
Oh, it's okay. But yeah, to answer your question, I think I want to say one last thing about apologizing, because I
Oh, okay.
experienced this myself and I think other parents experience it. And it is also a part of my personal story. There was a moment as a parent where I was really struggling, you know, with losing my cool and yelling. And it got to the point where my understanding about an apology is, it's not just saying I'm sorry, but there's also a real intention and a real effort to not repeat that behavior in the future. But I found myself in a cycle of saying, like, I'm really sorry for yelling. I'm going to try really hard not to yell. And then just being like, damn it, I'm doing it again. And beginning to feel like in myself, like my apologies were really impotent. And like, again, beginning to feel that shame and that guilt of like, do my apologies even mean anything to my kids anymore? Because I keep apologizing, but then I keep going right back and doing the same thing again. And I think with parents, that is like an incredibly humbling and powerless place to find ourselves. And again, like with parenting, I think if we're being honest about it, we will find ourselves humbled and powerless, like way more than most people admit, you know? Um,
Hmm.
and I think when you're in that place, there comes a place or a time where you just, like, you're so ashamed you almost want to stop apologizing, because you're like, what's the point? um and to be in that place and to keep apologizing and to keep trying, even though it feels like so embarrassing and so hopeless, but to just keep doing it is really powerful. And so I say that if parents find themselves in that same place, to like not give up and to not shame themselves and just like keep moving through that tunnel. um because for me, the other beautiful thing about parenting is it's so dynamic. You will feel like this is going to be the rest of your life, and then a month later the pattern has changed, or a year later. So I have found, like, I want to give my kids some credit too, and just like the mystery of life, but like through doing my own work, through my kids growing up, like through like life circumstances changing, I did arrive at a place where like I don't yell anymore, like genuinely. And it's beautiful. And I'm so glad I kept apologizing. And I did get to that place where, I made good on like my intention to stop the behavior. Um, yeah, that was the
That's
thing that I wanted to say.
that's all. That's great. Then I really uh I agree a lot with what a lot of you just said there. Um, because like I feel like I understand where the older generation's idea of never apologizing comes from, because you're supposed to be that like authoritarian figure. You're supposed to command that sort of respect. Um, and children are children and not adults, and you know that sort of mentality that goes with that. Um, and as I became a parent and working with my own son and everything, I kind of like hit this realization where like if I yell at him and he doesn't deserve it, I'm not going to just stand by that. He needs to understand that daddy's a human too. Daddy makes mistakes and daddy can apologize. Because I feel like it's not going to make him think he can walk on me, and I feel like that's what the older generation thought. Like if I show that sort of weakness to my kids, they're just going to think they can walk on me, and I don't really agree with that. I think that um leading with that sort of example, like I'm a human, I'm going to make mistakes, I'm going to hurt your feelings sometimes, and I'm gonna have to take accountability for that and tell you, hey, dude, look, you didn't deserve that, and I'm sorry, and I got to work on myself every single day, just like you do. And I feel like showing them that sort of uh, imperfection and that sort of, um, I guess, like compassion, right? That sort of like empathy. Uh, maybe by providing that example, they just innately start doing it without me having to explain it to them later. You know?
Yeah, I would love to speak to that. So, one of, and this is going to sound so silly, but truly, like, one of the biggest issues with how I was parented, especially when it came to me then becoming a parent, was that my parents were like actually really good at appearing perfect. Like my parents really, whether they did this consciously or unconsciously, they sold me this story of being like really solid providers,
Mhm.
never fighting in front of the kids, like being a really good team, sacrificing everything for their kids. And so when I became a parent and I started like making mistakes and not living up to that like really idealistic model that I like somehow accepted as reality, again, there was like a lot of shame, there was like a lot of guilt. And I think to your point, the kindest thing that we can do for our kids is to teach them how to be human. And being human means being incredibly imperfect. It means being very inconsistent, like, and
Yeah.
there's a way in which, we have to navigate our humanity skillfully because it will hurt people. It does require like communication and understanding and like a redundancy of relationships so that when someone lets us down, we hopefully have someone else we can kind of turn to, and we can let that person let us down instead of like expecting them to be perfect 100% of the time. Um, as far as like this authority figure, as far as this idea of like having to save face, I, really want to say that it's built on a hierarchical relationship model. And there for sure are some relationships that are naturally hierarchical, like employer and employee. But so many relationships where there isn't like a professional component absolutely shouldn't be hierarchical. There shouldn't be this idea that like un- unless we like subdue someone, they're going to like betray us or hurt us or run away from us or like devolve into evil. And so the other thing that we're hopefully in modern parenting modeling for our kids is this relationship where both people are equal contributors and both people are stakeholders. And there's an equality there. And to be sure, with parents and kids, it's tricky because your child is incredibly dependent on you. But if anything, that should make you more attuned to wanting to be in right relationship with the power that you have versus leveraging it and using it in a way that um, takes your child's humanity away. I think there's this big movement now where we're realizing that previous generations were incredibly childist, which is prejudiced against children and did not treat children like full humans. This whole like, you don't speak until you're spoken to, children should be seen and not heard, like all of this, like, children are free labor, like we're having children so that they can take care of us when we get older. None of this respects a child's individuality or humanity or their own desires and their own needs.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I kind of feel like I'm a healthy, like me personally, a healthy hybrid of that. Like when I tell my kid to do something, I expect him to do it. I'm your dad, but like I don't mistreat him. Like if I say clean that mess up, like you had toys out or something, if he tells me no, there's consequences, right? But I don't like mistreat him. over that. And if he catches me on a bad day, I'm in a bad mood, something's really just not going right, and I'm overwhelmed, and he just catches me in that right moment. If I do mistreat him in that moment, I apologize for it. Does that like kind of like make sense?
Yeah. And I think every family will navigate this in their own way. Like, part of the work that I do is when I'm working with clients, it's really come to the place now where if people used to be kind of uncomfortable with astrology and human design, I would still take them on as clients. And these days, in order to be like a best fit client for me, you have to be willing to let that piece enter the work, and you have to be kind of genuinely open to it. So these days, all my clients, I am taking a look at their astrology and their human design. And part of the reason that I do that is because it can kind of show me the bones of someone's personality and their character. And some people, just by their like very human nature, and again, there's nothing wrong with it and it shouldn't be shamed, are more authoritarian, and they like having rules. Like they like these boundaries of like, this is the way we do things. And
Mm-hmm.
if you don't, that's actually a problem for me. Like I have a need, like a real need to have this sort of structure. And then there are other people, and I think I fall more in this camp, that are, I think might be labeled as permissive, but in reality, there's just like a kind of freewheeling nature and like an understanding that like it's okay to march to the beat of your own drum, and like things can be like chaotic and disorganized, and that's okay. And regardless where you fall, it's beautiful. But
Mm-hmm.
I think the thing that I want to point out is that where there can be problems is if you and your child are very different in that regard, because then there is this piece of the parent kind of imposing their own nature onto their child and causing like conditioning and self-abandonment. So
Yeah.
that's where I think the astrology really is incredibly useful, because I can say, oh yeah, like no, you and your kid do think the same around boundaries and structure. So this is great. Keep doing it. But
Mm-hmm.
if the parent is very freewheeling, but the child would actually appreciate more structure, then I can work with parents to help them both meet themselves in this creative way where the parent gets what they need and the kid gets what they need, and vice versa too. If the parent is more authoritarian, but if the child actually has strong signatures for like a connection to their own autonomy, then again, we can, that's what I specialize in, is in working with the parents so they don't self-abandon, but
Mm-hmm.
so the child also doesn't self-abandon.
Yeah, no, I feel like that's really, really important. And that whole the self-abandonment can really lead you to having like detrimental experiences with your kid too. And like I believe having with children rules and structure and routine are very important, but I also believe within those rules and structures that there needs to be the flexibility to work with them as an individual. Because I look at myself and like I know about myself, if an authority figure orders me to do something, my immediate reaction is to become combative. Like, you're not going to talk to me like that. I don't care what position of authority you think you're in. Like, I'm a human being. You're not going to talk to me like that. So in order to get me to do something, like say you want me to sweep the floor, if you walk in, CJ, sweep the floor. I'm going to look at you and be like, who are you talking to right now? But if you were to come in and say, hey man, could you help me out and sweep the floor for me? More than happy to help. You know, so like I said, like when you have that rules and structure, the expectation is sweep the floor. You need to have that flexibility to work with that person on the individual levels so that like, they respond in a positive manner. You can kind of form that relationship. And I feel like that builds trust.
Yeah. Well, and I think, I realize I'm using the word indigeneity a lot, but there's a way, and when I say indigeneity, just to be clear, I am talking about the root similarities of all indigenous cultures. So I'm not identifying, like if I were to identify with a particular tradition, my lineage is Slavic. My parents are actually immigrated from Poland.
Okay.
So if I wanted to like explore that further, I might like look for kind of Slavic folk traditions. That being said, I grew up in New Mexico, which has a lot of like Native American populations. So I also do identify um, just through kind of resonance in the land and in the culture that I grew up in with certain Native American practices. But I will say for people who are maybe worried about like cultural appropriation or like, you know, I'm a white person, is it okay for me to, you know, have indigenous practices? I will say that we are all of us indigenous to some place. And like the more primitive cultures or you know, and I kind of love primitivism, and I know some people there's a negative connotation with that, but like the roots of indigeneity are the same, and one of the roots is this mutuality and wanting to contribute, like understanding that in a village or in a community, like everyone has a really critical role to play, and it feels really good to get support and to give support. And so when you introduce that culture, a lot of times you don't even need to be authoritarian. You know, like your kids just understand, like, this is a common space. You know, we are all responsible for helping to maintain it and to respect it. And, you know, one of the things, like, I really appreciate what you said, the way that you invite a person into doing something really matters. And the more that I do this work and the more that I become really hypersensitive and tuned into languaging, the more I see that we talk in a way that does constellate opposition a lot. We talk in a way that does constellate like defensiveness a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, some of my work with parents, which is really fun and really rewarding, is honestly just relanguaging. So a parent might have a language pattern where for them, they just unconsciously will say something like, I need you to, or it's time to. And this child's system, like you said, there's like a fight or flight response that comes up. Like that languaging just feels too forceful. And so it can be so easy just to retrain yourself to, instead of saying, I need you to say, hey, would you be willing to? Or instead of, it's time to, you can say, you know, I want to request, like, or like you said, you know, would you be willing to help? And so even the tiniest little tweaks like that, you would be surprised at like what a massive difference it can make.
Yeah, because I feel like it's almost like there's that understanding of authority and respect, but there's nothing wrong with getting down on that person's level, you know, and being like, hey, I am above you in the food chain here, but there's no reason I need to put that in your face. Like I can get down here and talk to you like an equal, even though we have this understanding that I'm not really asking, I'm telling, but I'm showing you the respect of talking to you like a human being.
Yeah. Yeah, this idea of, you know, the food chain is an interesting one. And I like to reframe it as like a spectrum of dependencies, like who do we depend on for survival?
Hmm.
Um, you know, and who are we obligated to help survive? But it's interesting because yes, like we certainly have more power than our children, and
Right.
we certainly have obligations to, you know, to teach them what we want them to learn, and you know how we want them to like behave and move through the world. And I will also say there's, you know, and I alluded to this before. There's a way in which our children um, can give back to us in in this really beautiful reciprocity where they do invite us into our own work.
Right.
They do give us an opportunity to learn how to play again, to like reparent ourselves, to see the world differently, to maybe, change some things about our worldview that, we're realizing as we're parenting that needs updating. And so I think for me, and as I alluded to before, I'm definitely much more of the of the like freewheeling and like but I think it can be really interesting to examine kind of the perceived hierarchies and look
Mm-hmm.
for the reciprocity there.
Yeah, that's a really interesting thought form, because it sort of kind of goes hand in hand with kind of what I mentioned before, and I'm liking this back and forth because we're definitely coming from two sides of the same coin and kind of meeting in the middle here, which is really interesting. And it's sort of like the difference between, you know, you're in that position of power that you mentioned on the hierarchy, but you're kind of expressing the difference between um, commanding and leading, which is two wildly different things. You can command people all you want, but they're only going to listen to you so far. People respond much better to being like, having a leader instead of a commander, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, just not to I do really appreciate like your respect, because I do think we might this has kind of turned into a dialogue. The one thing that I will say that can be really exhilarating as a parent is to and again is like territory that we're not skilled in navigating, is to be in the territory of your child's no and of what comes after.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of times when a parent hears their child's no, um, there is immediately a power struggle that is constellated. Like the parent is immediately put in touch with their own nervous system needs for certainty and for control. And I think it can be just incredibly disorienting and scary when it happens. But
Mm-hmm.
like if, for example, you get told no by your child, and for whatever reason, it's a situation where you actually can't control them. Um, like I have worked with parents with extreme cases where like their child has some sort of eating issue like RFID or some sort of food sensitivity, and
Right.
they have been through this kind of cycle of like trying to force their kid to eat and not being able to, no matter
Mm-hmm.
what they do. Even if they hurt their child physically, even if they threaten to take away their kid's favorite thing, like even they just cannot force their kid to eat. Like even, I'm not saying that parents have done this, but I just want to take it to the extreme. And this is like a little bit of a content warning. Even
Mm-hmm.
if you force your kid's mouth open and try to shove food in there, they don't have to swallow it. And so when you're in a place of like that kind of no, and your kids know is the end of the road, and you're realizing there's like nothing you can do about it, that can be incredibly disorienting, and to be in that place of disempowerment in that way can also be like a really powerful initiation. And I've been in that place a couple of times where I've for me it was more like my kid is telling me no. I am feeling at a place where I don't have any tools or any skills. So I'm going to the go to, which is like, threatening them or bribing them, right? Like that's what we go
Mm-hmm.
to where we run out of skills. And just really kind of sitting with that and realizing for me personally, it was out of integrity. And there's a lot of nuance here. Like it can be an integrity if you have a strategy around it. So again, I don't want to shame parents who that's like where they go to, but for me personally, it felt out of integrity.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
And that was kind of like a dark night of the soul, you know, like, oh my God, like I actually don't have control over my kid. And I will say too, like, and this is something I work on with my parents, there is a very like sacred space beyond the no, where like you build skills around like being in the territory of the no, but also what happens beyond the no that isn't just bribing or consequences or punishment. And so one of the things that I will share with you, one of the skills that I teach parents is translating what your child is either saying or doing. This can be communication that's both verbal and nonverbal, into an unmet need. And so when our child offers us a no, or for whatever reason doesn't want to cooperate with us, I will say, don't skip the part of just like marinating in the powerlessness of hearing that no. I actually think that's very transformative and alchemical, and it can teach you a lot about yourself as a person, as a parent. But like once you're done just being in that place of like, oh, my kid told me no, and I think I just have to accept it. Wow, this feels really uncomfortable. You can begin to explore their no, you know, and see like, okay, like why are you telling me no? What, you know, what would it take to turn this no into a yes that's actually intrinsically motivated, like a yes that you actually mean? And there's a lot of work there around like exploring the kids, you know, feelings and needs and their narrative. And so much of the time our kids tell us no, out of a need to be in contact with their own agency and with their own autonomy. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges for both kids and parents, is to not override a kid's autonomy. But also, you know, to your point, like we are their parents, we do have to keep them safe. There are expectations. So sometimes, you know, it does kind of feel like, yeah, like I need you to do what I'm telling you to do, either for safety or just because like we're going to be late or like whatever, like this needs to happen. And so that's another thing that I, you know, encourage parents to explore, but also that I work on with parents is how do you allow your child's agency to really bloom, at the same time as you are, you know, obligated as a parent to like to take care of them and to teach them and to get things out of them. So you don't, you know, have to completely subsume your own needs and your own sanity. So
Yeah. And you know, I'm really interested to hear you kind of expand on this a little bit further. And I'm going to offer you like a very genuine scenario, like not even made up like 100%. This is how I am. But before I do that, I kind of want to touch on you mentioned like kids, like when it comes to like eating and they have ARFID and things like that. I've often found that negotiating gets you much further, right? That sort of wow, buddy, really? That's sort of like that negotiation where it's like you're gonna eat this right now because I said so, and more like, and I just actually just talked about this on the previous episode with Misty, like uh you know, I'll do that. Like, I understand that you need to get up and move, but here's what I want. You give me 3 bites, 1 minute on the trampoline. You give me 4 bites, 1 minute on the trampoline. That sort of like negotiation gets me so much further in those type of scenarios with him, especially when I would need him to perform a task. Because I haven't gotten him tested yet because I do think he has like some ADHD things going on. Yeah, you're playing Xbox. I understand. Hey, dude, don't tear stuff off my wall. Come on. And I feel like, you know, like offering that sort of negotiation scenario is why are you mad? You don't know what to say? Okay, I don't know what to say either. I don't know why you just yelled at me. What's going on? What's upsetting you? Hey, look at me. Bubba, what happened? You don't know? All right, we'll get it out. You're good now? Okay. Um that's sort of like that back and forth, like I want you to do this and I understand you want to do that. So kind of let's work with that together. So I kind of like understand what you're saying without that being like that real hard, like you're doing what I said right now because I said it. Um but like me as a parent as well, and this is what I talk about, like that genuine scenario, and you brought up like dealing with a child when they say the word no to you. And oftentimes, like if I'm in a position where things have got to get done or something has to happen, for various reasons, and I'm like, hey, put your shoes on. He goes, no, bro, I'm not asking. Don't tell me no. You're not going to disrespect me like that. I need you to put your shoes on. We have something we need to get done. That's sort of like the stance I take with him. Um, so in that sort of scenario, with what you explained previously, like what would your point of view and like your advice to me to be like to handle that sort of situation?
Well, I can share my point of view, and I want to be clear.
Mm-hmm.
This isn't about getting you to change what you're doing or feeling like you need to improve. But
Right.
it's so funny that we're talking about shoes. I think this is universal to every parent because I certainly have my shoe moments, and I will share what we do, and I'll share it as just information, and it's not intended to like correct you.
Oh,
But
absolutely. Just as a disclaimer, I'm not asking you to tell me how to change my
yeah,
ways, and
okay.
I'm not looking for an argument. I'm genuinely interested in your perspective.
So my kids will sometimes like not want to put their shoes on, or will be running so late that like I don't even have time to put their shoes on for them. So here's how I kind of break it down, or how I have been doing it is like, first I will ask them to do it themselves. And I will make sure that there's no obstacles. So it's not like they have to go find their shoes. Like I'll put their shoes and socks next to them. And then usually like I'll ask a couple of times, I'll be like, hey, like I've already asked you once to put on your shoes on, please put your shoes on. We got to go. And then, if that doesn't work, and if we still have time, honestly, usually I'll just put their shoes on for them.
Mm-hmm.
And then if we're like really running out of time, or if they really don't want to put their shoes on, I will just take their shoes with me to the car, and they'll just go to the car barefoot. And then in the car, a lot of times with children, what's really magical is a lot of times a change of scenery or a change of environment is like just the thing. And that's like low hanging fruit that we often don't realize is available to us. But literally, if you can just be like, I'm going to actually ask them in this room now, and like you might get a completely different answer. It's wild. So like usually in the car, they'll put on their own shoes, or they will let me put on their shoes, without like wriggling away and wanting to play. So that's usually what we end up doing. I should have said, I tend to parent in a very low demand way. And when I say low demand, it's low demand for both my children and also for me. And
Mm-hmm.
for me, because I am really sensitive to energetics. Like not only am I neurodiverse myself, but I also have some chronic illness stuff going on. So for me, energy does not feel like a sustainable resource a lot of the time. So
Mm.
for me, I will prioritize how I'm parenting and what I'm doing around what conserves my energy. And what I have found is that entering into conflict or oppositionality with my children like takes my spoons. And so I will kind of flow like water around like instead of just being like, yes, you will. No, I won't. Yes, you will. I'll just be like, you know what? Screw it. Like is not an argument that I want to have right now. I'm just taking your shoes. We're going to the car. Like, this makes life easier for everyone.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and I totally get it because, you know, a lot of us out here raising these kids on the spectrum, these you have like the way that you view parenting and what you know, and a lot of the times it's based on how you were raised. And a lot of times, you know, these kids, like, it just doesn't work. And most of us are out here like, listen, I will try anything at this point. Like, what are you doing and what is working for you? Because what I'm doing is not working at all. So hit me with something new that I haven't tried yet, you know? So I feel like it's really important for all of us to really have these conversations and really talk about the different ways we're doing things, because parents out here are really going to benefit from having this like well of ideas to pull things from, the, you know, stuff they haven't tried yet, or maybe something that would be considered unconventional or like out of the box from the way they've raised. And like, you know, you're doing something different when their grandparents are looking at you like, why are you putting up with that? You know, sort of how like he just yelled at me, right? And I understand that, you know, raising a neurodivergent child, that him yelling at me right now, that wasn't an expression of disrespect. That was him communicating an emotional state, right? So obviously, like, I'm not gonna yell at him and punish him, or have like a timeout or a consequence for that. Like, I understand that he's not being disrespectful. It's just that's the only way he can let me know right now that he's having this sort of emotional situation going on. Where at other times, if I'm talking to him, he does know what disrespect is. He will roll his eyes at me so hard they hit the back of his head. And you know, at that point, you're like, whoa, 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 whoa. No, 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 no. You're not going to behave like that towards me. And that's sort of like the approach that I take. I'm very aware of what is just communication, and also very aware of what is him being combative and not respecting me as a father, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And I think what you're speaking to is attunement. And I think this is something that parents often struggle with like really being in the present moment and really reading their kids correctly. Because one of the really frustrating things about kids is, and actually a lot of adults, is that we are not communicating very clearly. There's like hidden behind our words and our behavior, a lot of times what we're doing is kind of passive aggressive, or like, we're kind of using whatever like communication coping skills we have, like around like manipulation or coercion, to kind of get our needs met. But we're not just coming out and clearly stating like our feeling and our need. Like, no one walks around being like, I'm feeling a little sad, would you give me a hug? Like, instead we're
Mm-hmm.
like, we pick a fight with our partner. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, it's so like weird the way that
Yeah.
we communicate. um so I completely see what you're saying, and I think what how I would characterize that is there's just attunement. Like, your kid can scream at you, and if you're attuned, you can understand like, oh, there's like a connection or a safety need here. Or your kid can scream at you, and you can be in touch with your own need for respect, and just be like, listen, like, in this moment, it's I'm going to interpret it this way. And I think a lot of parents will kind of not be able to take it so in such a nuanced way, in such a case by case basis, like they will always interpret screaming as disrespect versus kind of
Mm-hmm.
like what you said. um I wanted to circle back to at one point you were explaining that like negotiating is one of your parenting tools or parenting skills for like everyone kind of getting their needs met. And I wanted to speak to that because I actually think that's really spot on. And I did want to add a little bit of nuance though, because I think a lot of times when we think of negotiation, we maybe couple it or overcouple it with this idea of compromise, right? Like, we're going to have to meet in the middle. And I just wanted to float this idea that there's actually a way to negotiate and to co-create a strategy that really does feel like a win-win. And it really does feel like mutually satisfying to both people. I think the idea of compromise, there's kind of this sense that like, oh, I might be giving something up, or I'm getting like part of what I want, but not all of what I want. And I think as you practice the skill and the art of negotiation, it's really amazing to discover, wow, there's so many solutions here where we both fully get what we want and like everyone wins.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just wanted to share that.
Yeah, no, I feel like it's so important, because when it comes to these especially these kids, and I don't have any neurotypical children, so I can't make hard opinionated statements, but I would venture to say that you would maybe even get further with neurotypical children too, if you didn't have just a solid authoritarian stance. Like if they have, some sort of need, and you can negotiate with that so that both things happen, um, you may be able to get further with them. And it also teaches important life skills, because they're gonna see the way you deal with them, and then they're gonna use those same strategies in their own personal relationships. And they know if you have this sort of, and I don't necessarily prescribe to the whole idea of gentle parenting. I There are aspects to it that I agree with, and then there's aspects that I don't. But I want to say, like, it's like a gentle approach, right? To, um, basically, like, you're teaching them responsibility, you're teaching them relationship management, you're teaching them, how to work with people rather than, like you said before, that hierarchical. Wow, I can pronounce words today. Uh, that hierarchy, sort of mindset,
Yeah, I think, humans really biologically, and this is something that we just can't argue with, biologically, we are designed to be social and to be interdependent. And so when, again, especially in this culture, we're kind of indoctrinated into this like hyper independence, or, like you said, this kind of more hierarchical, like extractive way of relating, we're actually going against our nature. And it's really much more like fulfilling and creative and energizing to be in that place of collaboration, and kind of like mutually co-creating a path forward and a solution, versus just being like, I have this idea of how it has to go, it's my way or the highway. I think a lot of times if we give our kids a chance to weigh in and to contribute, we're like, well, wow, that's actually like a really good idea that I wouldn't have thought of. Yes, that works for everyone, let's do that. And then our kid can also feel a sense of pride and ownership for being the one to kind of offer that idea or that part of the solution. So yeah, I think, again, I think just words are so interesting, and so many people have different connotations with, for example, the phrase like gentle parenting, like, or like permissive parenting, or like whatever. And I think that is actually, I have seen that become a problem, because parents will decide that they do want to gentle parent, because for them, like, gentle has like a positive connotation. But then they again end up feeling really stuck, because the way that they're approaching it is just too kind of rigid for what their situation is actually calling for. And the thing that I just want to keep bringing both myself and my clients and us back around to is that, like, parenting is so dynamic. And honestly, I think the best way to parent is, you're going to find that case by case, you are reaching for like different styles and different skills, and the more kind of well versed, the more range you have as a parent, the better you will parent. So I
Mm-hmm.
think to just be like, oh, I need to be like calm all the time. Oh my God. Like, I have been in that place. I've been in the place of thinking, like, as a parent, I just need to be super calm all the time. I can never raise my voice. Wow. Like, did that do a number on my nervous system? Like, I shamed myself so much because I couldn't, it's very unrealistic. And so I think it's to kind of put yourself in a particular camp or style of parenting, again, just be really careful with what you're like cutting yourself off from and what you're forcing yourself into.
It's almost like you could coin that term like adaptive parenting at this point
Ooh,
from
love
everything you
that.
said.
Yeah.
And
Yes. The new trend.
right. There's so much merit to that because it's like it doesn't disregard people's like personal views and like the way they think that they should get things done, but it encourages them to be open-minded and to try other things depending on the scenario.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah. This conversation did not take any of the traditional paths that I usually take um, when doing an episode of this show, and I gotta say, I need to have you back on because like I can tell that like the depth you're able to get into, there's going to be so much value in that, and I got to have you come back and talk more on that. But we're kind of like reaching like the end of that, and we didn't even cover your entire personal story, which is highly unusual for the show. But it was just you captivated my attention so much with the way you think and like the different things that you're trying and what you encourage parents to do, and I can only imagine that some of the people that are listening to this right now are kind of feeling the same way, like "Yeah, she's really on to something here, So I would really like you to take this time here and tell us, you know, about what you do and how people can reach you, and promote just anything you need to.
Yay. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me on. I really also would love to come back on. I really enjoyed talking with you. So I think it's so wonderful that we connected. Um, so if people are interested in learning more about me, the kind of hub of my work is my website. It's celestinawild.com, and I'm sure we'll have that in the show notes. And
Absolutely.
yeah, so I offer one-on-one coaching. I'm pretty flexible. Like you can sign up for a single session or you can enter into a longer term container. My container sizes are 6 months, which is a really fun amount of time to see some real results and some real transformation. The I do, like I mentioned earlier, one of the things that differentiates me from a lot of other parent coaches is as I think you've experienced in this conversation, I come at it from a very different place. Unshaming is such a big part of my work, and creating something that's self-appropriate for the parent is also a big part of my work, because I think a lot of times as parents we are like trying to do what our parents did or trying to do what we think society wants us to do, or like trying to follow a trend, and all of that is a form of self-abandonment. So we really work and it frees up so much energy when you're finally like in alignment with who you are. And parents need energy. It's like it's one of our most important resources. So that there's one-on-one work. I also do have a fair amount of like worksheets and courses. In fact, if you're interested, some of the stuff that I was talking about today with languaging or with translating um, kids' words and their behavior into a feeling and an unmet need, and then being able to like work on that level and respond to that. I have a course called Compassionate Communication. It's only an hour long. It's only $8, but it goes into that technique and that process, and it teaches it to you, and it gives examples. And so that could be something that people might be interested in. And then I did, mention before we start recording, I do have my own podcast where it is kind of longer form, and it is kind of this wacky point of view that I have. And I also have a Substack, same, like it's long form writing where it's this kind of exploration. So people can access me completely for free in those ways as well.
That's all. What's the name of your podcast?
It's called Archetypos. And I think my Substack is also called Archetypos. So the type of astrology I do is archetypal astrology, and archetypes are kind of these sort of universal behavioral patterns and needs and desires but everyone kind of expresses them in their own way, and different people have different affinities with different archetypes. But it kind of speaks to like our collective humanity, but also very much our individual kind of living out of that collective humanity. And then I just liked turning archetypes into archetypos, because that to me is like, oh yeah, there's universal archetypes, but then the way that each human kind of expresses that is like a typo, but it's sometimes typos turn into like actual words or slang. And so it just, I don't know, it speaks to my love of language and also of archetypes.
That's great. We're also going to include a link to your show in the show notes as well, right alongside your website. And do you have like an email address people can reach out to you at?
Yeah, if people want to email me, it's celestinawild@gmail.com, and we can throw that in the show notes as well.
Absolutely. Hey, this has been phenomenally interesting. I have 1,000 more questions for you. And it's very special to me when I can have somebody come on who has different points of view than I do. And it's one of the reasons why I like having these conversations, because I'm not one for arguing with people, because when you argue, that means you think you're right and somebody else is wrong. And in these sort of situations, I don't think of it that way. I think of it as, this is different. So I love hearing people who have points of view that are just drastically different than my own. And having those conversations. So they said, like, I could go for hours with you about this at this point. You really got my attention very strongly. And so, I'm really glad to have had you on the show today. And I just want to say thank you for sitting down with me.
Yes, this was so fun for me as well. And I do really appreciate, I'm actually kind of curious to look at your chart, because you have a very like Gemini quality about you, which is exactly what you said. It's like, it's more curious than it is judgmental or closed-minded. Like, and that doesn't mean that it doesn't have its own point of view, but there's just this prioritization of learning over convincing. And that was actually very lovely, to be in conversation with. So thank you for like drawing out of me the things that I shared. And I would absolutely love to do a part 2.
Fantastic. All right. Well, again, thanks for hanging out with me, and I'm looking forward to the next time.
You're so welcome. Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to the Brighter Spectrum podcast. If you have any comments, questions, or stories to share, or if you'd like to be a guest on the show, feel free to reach out to me at BrighterSpectrumPodcast@gmail.com. I'd love to hear from you. Until next time, take care and keep shining a light on the journey of parenting.
Thank you for listening.